My name is Oscar, and I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to end up in a situation like this. Caught in a web of deceit so twisted it could unravel my entire life. I'm 38 years old, a senior project manager at a tech firm in Seattle, and I've always prided myself on being the calm, collected type. But last Thanksgiving, everything I thought I knew about my family, my career, and even myself was turned upside down. It all started with a glass of wine at my in-laws' annual holiday dinner, a glass of wine that wasn't meant for me. I've been married to my wife, Elena, for 12 years. We met in college, bonded over late-night study sessions, and a shared love for hiking in the Pacific Northwest. She's the kind of woman who lights up a room, smart, witty, and fiercely independent. Her family, though, has always been a different story. Elena's parents, Richard and Vivian, are the kind of people who wear their wealth like a badge of honor. Richard is a retired surgeon, and Vivian runs a charity foundation that, frankly, seems more about social status than actual charity. They live in a sprawling estate just outside Portland, with manicured gardens, a koi pond, and a dining room that looks like it belongs in a historical drama. Every Thanksgiving, they host a lavish dinner for the extended family, and every year, I brace myself for the subtle jabs and backhanded compliments. This year, though, something felt off from the moment we arrived. Elena was quieter than usual. Her usual spark dimmed as she fidgeted with her necklace, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since our early dating days. Richard greeted us with his usual firm handshake and a tight smile, but Vivian was different. She pulled me into a hug that lasted a little too long, her perfume overwhelming, and whispered in my ear, "Oscar, I made something special for you tonight." Her voice was syrupy sweet, but there was an edge to it that sent a shiver down my spine. I brushed it off as her usual theatrics. She'd always been overly dramatic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her words carried a hidden meaning. The dining room was already buzzing when we walked in. Elena's younger brother, Nate, was there with his new girlfriend, a bubbly woman named Clara, who seemed blissfully unaware of the family dynamics. Aunt Marjorie, Richard's sister, was sipping her third glass of Chardonnay and complaining about her neighbor's dog, while Uncle Ted, Vivian's brother, was trying to convince everyone to invest in his latest cryptocurrency scheme. The table was set with crystal glasses, silver cutlery, and a centerpiece of white roses that probably cost more than my monthly rent back in college. I took my seat next to Elena, trying to focus on the smell of roasted turkey and sage stuffing, but my eyes kept drifting to Vivian. She was bustling around the table, pouring wine from a decanter with a label I didn't recognize, a deep red that shimmered in the candlelight. "Oscar, this one's for you," Vivian said, placing a glass in front of me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The way she said it, the way her fingers lingered on the stem of the glass made my stomach twist. I glanced at Elena, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but she was staring at her plate, her fork trembling slightly in her hand. "It's a special blend," Vivian continued, her voice almost a purr. "I picked it out just for my favorite son-in-law." Richard, who was sitting at the head of the table, let out a low chuckle, but it wasn't a warm one. It was the kind of laugh that made you feel like you were the butt of a joke you didn't understand. I lifted the glass to my lips, the rich aroma of the wine hitting me. Notes of blackberry, oak, and something else I couldn't quite place. But just as I was about to take a sip, I noticed Vivian watching me, her eyes sharp and unblinking, like a predator sizing up its prey. My gut screamed at me to stop. Something wasn't right. I set the glass down, pretending to adjust my napkin, and that's when I saw it. Vivian's smile faltered for a split second, replaced by a flash of frustration. She quickly recovered, turning to pour a glass for Richard, but I couldn't unsee that look. My heart started pounding. What was in that wine? And why was she so intent on making sure I drank it? I sat there, frozen, the glass of wine untouched in front of me, while the chatter of the dinner table buzzed around us like white noise. My mind was racing, replaying Vivian's words, her expression, the way Elena wouldn't meet my eyes. I've always been good at reading people. It's part of what makes me successful at my job, managing high-stakes projects and difficult clients. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was my family, or at least the family I'd married into, and the stakes felt higher than any deadline I'd ever faced. I decided to test the waters. "This wine looks amazing, Vivian," I said, forcing a smile as I picked up the glass again, swirling the deep red liquid like I'd seen sommeliers do in fancy restaurants. "What's in this special blend?" I kept my tone light, casual, but I was watching her every move. Vivian's smile tightened just for a moment before she waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, just a little something I picked up from a vineyard in Bordeaux last summer," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "It's got a unique finish. I thought you'd appreciate it, Oscar, since you're always so adventurous." Adventurous? That word stuck out like a sore thumb. Vivian had never called me adventurous before. She'd called me practical once, in a tone that made it clear she didn't mean it as a compliment. She'd called me adequate when I got promoted last year, her way of saying she wasn't impressed. But adventurous? That was new, and it didn't sit right. I glanced at Richard again, who was now sipping his own glass of wine, his eyes fixed on me over the rim. He hadn't said a word since his earlier chuckle, but the weight of his stare was suffocating. Helena finally spoke up, her voice small and shaky. "Maybe you should try the white wine instead, Oscar," she said, reaching for a bottle on the table. "It's lighter. You like lighter wines, right?" Her words came out in a rush, and she wouldn't look at me as she poured a glass of pale gold liquid, her hands trembling so badly that a few drops splashed onto the tablecloth. Vivian's head snapped toward Elena, her eyes narrowing for a split second before she forced a laugh. "Nonsense, Elena," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Oscar can handle a little red, can't you, dear?" That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining things. Helena's nervousness, Vivian's insistence, Richard's silent scrutiny, it all added up to something sinister. I set the glass down again, this time more deliberately, and leaned back in my chair, my heart hammering in my chest. "You know, I think I'll stick with water for now," I said, reaching for the pitcher in the center of the table. "I've got a long drive back to Seattle tomorrow, and I don't want to overdo it." I kept my voice steady, but inside I was screaming. What the hell was going on? Vivian's face froze, her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment I thought she might argue. But then she shrugged, turning her attention to Nate and Clara, who were oblivious to the tension, laughing about some story Clara was telling about her cat. Richard, though, didn't let up. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, and fixed me with a look that made my blood run cold. "You're a cautious man, Oscar," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "That's a good trait, but sometimes caution can hold you back. Sometimes you have to take a risk." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was spinning with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Was there something in the wine? Poison, a sedative, something worse? And why me? I'd never been close with Vivian and Richard. They'd always made it clear they thought Elena could have done better. But this felt personal, calculated. I looked at Elena again, hoping for some kind of clue. But she was staring at her lap, her knuckles white as she gripped her fork. I needed to get her alone, to figure out what she knew. but I couldn't do that without raising suspicion. The dinner dragged on, course after course: creamy pumpkin soup, herb-crusted turkey, mashed potatoes with truffle oil, but I barely tasted any of it. My eyes kept drifting to the glass of wine, still sitting there like a ticking time bomb. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. That's when I noticed Vivian whispering something to Richard, her hand on his arm, her expression intense. They both glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't over yet. And I had a sinking feeling that if I didn't act soon, I might not make it through the night. I knew I had to act, but I couldn't let Vivian or Richard see that I was on to them. If they were willing to go this far, whatever this was, I had to assume they'd cover their tracks. I needed to be smart to play their game while I figured out my next move. The dining room felt like a pressure cooker. Every clink of a fork, every burst of laughter from Nate and Clara, amplifying the tension coiling in my chest. I had to get that glass of wine away from me, but I couldn't just dump it out without drawing attention. That's when an idea hit me, a risky one, but I was running out of options. I turned to Elena, who was still avoiding my gaze, her face pale, and her fingers twisting the edge of her napkin. "Hey, babe," I said, keeping my voice light. "I'm going to grab some more ice from the kitchen. Want to help me?" It was a flimsy excuse. We were at her parents' house, and there were probably a dozen staff members who could have fetched ice, but I needed to get her alone. Elena hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Vivian, who was now carving the turkey with a precision that felt unnervingly deliberate. "Sure," Elena finally mumbled, pushing back her chair with a scrape that made Aunt Marjorie wince. As we stood, I grabbed the glass of wine, pretending to take it with me to finish later. Vivian's head snapped up, her knife pausing mid-slice. "Oh, Oscar, you don't need to take that," she said, her tone a little too cheerful. "I'll pour you a fresh one when you get back." Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run through me. "No worries," I replied, forcing a smile. "I don't want to waste it. It's too special, right?" Her smile didn't waver, but her grip on the knife tightened, her knuckles whitening. Richard watched the exchange in silence, his expression unreadable, but I could feel the weight of his stare like a physical thing. Elena and I slipped into the kitchen, the door swinging shut behind us, muffling the sounds of the dinner party. The kitchen was massive, all gleaming stainless steel and marble countertops, with a tray of freshly baked dinner rolls cooling on the island. I set the glass of wine down on the counter, far from the ice bucket, and turned to Elena, grabbing her gently by the shoulders. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered, my voice low but urgent. "You've been acting strange all night, and your mom. I think there's something in that wine." Elena talked to me. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought she might break down right there. "Oscar, I don't know for sure," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "But I heard Mom and Dad talking this morning before you got here. They were in the study, and I wasn't supposed to hear, but they mentioned your name, and something about taking care of things before the end of the year." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Taking care of things? What did that even mean? I pressed her for more, my hands tightening on her shoulders. "What else did they say, Elena? I need to know." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know, I swear. It was all so vague, but Mom sounded angry. She said something about how you were in the way, and Dad agreed. I thought maybe they were talking about your job, or I don't know, Oscar. I didn't think they'd actually do something." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I pulled her into a hug, my mind racing. In the way? Of what? I'd always known Richard and Vivian didn't think I was good enough for Elena. They'd made that clear from the day we got engaged, but this was on a whole other level. Were they actually trying to hurt me? I glanced at the glass of wine on the counter, the deep red liquid catching the light in a way that now looked ominous. I needed to know what was in it, but I couldn't exactly send it to a lab in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. Then I remembered something. Nate. Elena's brother had always been the odd one out in the family, more laid back, less caught up in the drama of wealth and status. He'd also taken a few chemistry classes in college before dropping out to become a graphic designer. If anyone might have an idea, or at least a way to test the wine without raising suspicion, it was him. But I'd have to be careful. If Vivian and Richard were watching me this closely, they'd notice if I started acting too suspicious. I wiped the tears from Elena's cheeks, trying to steady my own breathing. "We're going to figure this out," I told her, my voice firm despite the fear clawing at my insides. "But you need to act normal when we go back out there. Can you do that?" She nodded, sniffling, and I handed her a paper towel to dry her face. I grabbed a few ice cubes from the bucket, more for show than anything else, and picked up the glass of wine again, my mind already working on how to get Nate alone without tipping off Vivian and Richard. Whatever they were planning, I wasn't going to let them win. Not without a fight. We returned to the dining room, Elena clutching the ice bucket like a lifeline, her face composed but her eyes still red-rimmed. I set the glass of wine back on the table, careful to place it exactly where it had been, hoping Vivian wouldn't notice I hadn't taken a sip. She was now passing around a platter of glazed carrots, her smile back in place, but I caught her glancing at the glass, her expression flickering with something I couldn't quite read. Relief, maybe, or anticipation. Richard, meanwhile, was deep in conversation with Uncle Ted about blockchain technology, but I noticed his eyes dart toward me every few seconds, like he was waiting for something to happen. I needed to get Nate's attention without drawing suspicion, which was easier said than done in a room full of people. Nate was sitting across the table, laughing at something Clara had said, his cheeks flushed from the wine he'd already had. I waited until Vivian was distracted, fussing over Aunt Marjorie's plate, and then leaned across to Nate, keeping my voice low. "Hey man, can you help me with something in the kitchen real quick?" I asked, nodding toward the door. "It's about the dessert. I think I messed up the whipped cream." It was a terrible excuse, but Nate didn't seem to care. He shrugged, gave Clara a quick kiss on the cheek, and followed me out of the room. Once we were back in the kitchen, I closed the door behind us and turned to Nate, lowering my voice to a whisper. "I need your help, and you can't tell anyone about this, not even Clara," I said, my tone deadly serious. Nate's easygoing smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion. "What's going on, Oscar? You look like you've seen a ghost." I pointed to the glass of wine, which I'd brought with me again, and took a deep breath. "I think your mom might have put something in this. Something bad. I need to know if there's a way to test it, without anyone else knowing." Nate's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought he might laugh it off as a joke. But then he saw the look on my face, the way my hands were shaking, and he nodded slowly. Okay, let's think about this," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I don't have a lab or anything, but I might be able to do a basic test. Back in college, I learned a few tricks, like using pH strips or checking for sediment, but if it's something serious, like poison, we'd need more than that." He paused, his brow furrowing. "Why do you think Mom would do something like that? I mean, she's intense, but poison?" I quickly filled him in on what Elena had overheard, Vivian and Richard talking about taking care of things, and me being in the way. I told him about Vivian's insistence on the wine, her strange behavior, and the way Richard kept watching me like a hawk. Nate listened, his expression growing darker with every word. "That's messed up," he finally said, his voice tight. "I always knew they didn't like you, but this is next-level crazy." He hesitated, then added, "You know, Mom's been stressed lately, right? The charity foundation. She's been fighting with some board members who want to audit the finances. Dad's been on edge too, but I never thought they'd go after you." Nate's words sent a fresh wave of dread through me. An audit? Finances? Was that what this was about? I'd heard rumors over the years, whispers that Vivian's charity wasn't as charitable as it seemed, that she and Richard might be skimming funds for personal use. But I'd never paid much attention to it. I wasn't involved in their world of high society and shady dealings, or at least, I thought I wasn't. Suddenly, a memory flashed in my mind. A conversation I'd had with Elena a few months ago. She'd mentioned that her parents had asked me to join the charity's board of directors. Something about wanting fresh eyes on their operations. I declined, citing my busy schedule at work, but maybe that decision had put a target on my back. Nate rummaged through a drawer, pulling out a small plastic case that looked like a first aid kit. "I've got some basic testing stuff in here," he said, opening it to reveal a few pH strips, a tiny vial of liquid, and a magnifying glass. "It's not much, but it's a start. Let's see if there's anything obvious." He dipped a pH strip into the wine, watching as the color changed, his brow furrowing as he compared it to the chart on the box. "Huh," he muttered, his voice tense. "That's not normal. The pH is way off. It's too acidic for wine. And look at this." He tilted the glass under the light, pointing to a faint cloudiness at the bottom. "That's sediment. Could be natural, but it doesn't look right." My stomach dropped. Sediment? An abnormal pH? I didn't need a chemistry degree to know that wasn't good. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nate looked at me, his expression grim. "We need to get this to someone who can test it properly, a lab, or maybe even the police, but we can't let Mom and Dad know we're onto them. If they're capable of this, who knows what else they'll do." I nodded, my mind already racing with possibilities. I needed to protect myself and Elena, but I also needed to turn the tables. If Vivian and Richard wanted to play dirty, I'd show them I could play dirtier. I knew I had to act fast, but I also had to be strategic. If Vivian and Richard were desperate enough to tamper with my wine, they wouldn't stop there. Not if they realized I was onto them. Nate and I stood in the kitchen, the glass of wine sitting on the counter like a grenade with the pin half pulled. The faint sediment at the bottom seemed to glow under the harsh kitchen lights, a silent testament to whatever they'd planned for me. I couldn't just confront them, not yet. I needed proof, and I needed a way to protect myself and Elena while I got it. "Let's get back out there," I told Nate, my voice steadier than I felt. "Act like everything's normal. I'll figure out a way to get this to a lab tomorrow, but for now, we can't let them suspect anything." Nate nodded, his jaw tight, and slipped the pH strips back into the plastic case, hiding it in the drawer. I poured the wine down the sink, watching the red liquid swirl away, and rinsed the glass thoroughly before filling it with water from the pitcher. If Vivian asked, I'd say I'd spilled it and didn't want more. It wasn't a great excuse, but it would have to do. We returned to the dining room, where dessert was now being served. Pumpkin pie with a dollop of whipped cream, the kind of picture-perfect dish that would have felt comforting under normal circumstances. Vivian glanced at my empty glass as I sat down, her brow furrowing for a split second before she plastered on another smile. "Oh, Oscar, you didn't like the wine?" she asked, her tone dripping with false concern. "I spilled it," I said, meeting her gaze head-on. "Clumsy me, but the water's great." Her smile didn't waver, but I saw the flicker of irritation in her eyes. Richard, meanwhile, didn't say a word, just cut into his pie with a precision that made my skin crawl. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I kept up appearances, laughing at Uncle Ted's terrible jokes and nodding along as Clara talked about her plans for a Christmas trip to Aspen. Elena stayed quiet, her hand resting on mine under the table, her grip tight enough to bruise. I could tell she was barely holding it together, but she played her part, even managing a weak smile when Vivian complimented her dress. Nate was a better actor than I expected, chatting animatedly with Clara, and even asking Vivian for the recipe for her cranberry sauce, as if he hadn't just helped me uncover a potential crime. When the night finally ended, Elena and I said our goodbyes, enduring Vivian's overly warm hug and Richard's firm handshake. "Drive safe, Oscar," Vivian said, her voice honey-sweet. "We'll see you at Christmas, yes?" I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, I was already planning my next move. As soon as we were in the car, Elena broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I'm so sorry, Oscar," she whispered. "I should have said something sooner. I didn't think they'd actually do something like this." I pulled her into my arms, stroking her hair as I stared out the windshield into the dark. "It's not your fault," I told her, "but we're going to make this right." The next morning, I drove straight to a private lab in Seattle, one I'd used for work projects in the past. I'd kept the glass I'd used at dinner, carefully wrapped in a plastic bag to preserve any residue, and handed it over to a technician I trusted, a guy named Marcus who owed me a favor. "I need this tested for anything unusual," I said, keeping my voice low. "And I need it fast." Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions, promising results within 48 hours. While I waited, I did some digging of my own, pulling up everything I could find on Vivian's charity foundation. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions: complaints on obscure forums, anonymous posts from former board members alleging financial misconduct, even a pending lawsuit from a donor who claimed funds had been misappropriated. 2 days later, Marcus called me with the results. "You were right to be worried," he said, his voice grim. "There's a high concentration of a sedative in the residue, enough to knock you out for hours, maybe even cause an overdose if you'd had more than a glass. And there's something else. Traces of a chemical that's often used to mask other substances. Someone didn't want this to be detected." I thanked him, my hand shaking as I hung up the phone. A sedative. They'd planned to knock me out, or worse, and I had a feeling I knew why. If I'd been on the charity's board, I might have noticed their shady dealings. By refusing, I'd become a loose end they couldn't afford. I could have gone to the police, but I wanted more than justice. I wanted revenge. I spent the next week working with a lawyer friend, gathering evidence from public records, the lab report, and even a recorded conversation with Nate, who'd agreed to help. We built a case that linked Vivian and Richard to the charity's fraud, using the attempted poisoning as leverage. When I finally confronted them, it was at their own Christmas gala, in front of their high society friends. I walked in with Elena by my side, a folder of evidence in my hand, and a smile on my face. "Vivian, Richard," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think it's time we talked about your charity, and what you tried to do to me at Thanksgiving." The room fell silent, all eyes on us. Vivian's face went white, her champagne flute slipping from her fingers and shattering on the floor. Richard tried to bluster, but I held up the lab report, my voice steady. "You tried to poison me, but I'm still here, and now everyone's going to know exactly who you are." The fallout was swift. guests whispering, some leaving in disgust, others pulling out their phones to record the drama. Within days, the charity was under investigation, and Vivian and Richard were facing charges for fraud and attempted assault. Elena stood by me through it all, her loyalty unwavering, and we started a new tradition. No more family dinners with her parents. As for me, I got the last laugh. I took a risk, turned the tables, and watched their empire crumble while mine stayed strong. Sometimes caution does hold you back, but sometimes it's the thing that saves your life and gives you the sweetest revenge.